This is Your Anxiety Toolkit, episode number 126. Welcome to Your Anxiety Toolkit. I'm your host, Kimberly Quinlan. This podcast is fueled by three main goals. The first goal is to provide you with some extra tools to help you manage your anxiety. Second goal, to inspire you. Anxiety doesn't get to decide how you live your life. And number three, and I leave the best for last, is to provide you with one big, fat virtual hug. Because experiencing anxiety ain't easy. If that sounds good to you, let's go. Well, welcome back. It is episode 126. Holy smokes, that's like a big mouthful when I said it. And I'm happy to be here with you. It is a late evening. I don't know why, but I have gotten into this bad rhythm of waiting until the very end of the day to record the podcast with you, usually because I have to think about it. And by the middle of the day, I'm like, no, I want to think about it a little bit more, but I really need to be better about making it a little earlier, mainly just for my own self-care. But hey, I'm here with you, and it's kind of nice. It's really quiet, and it's starting to get cold here in Southern California, and my house is still, which is so rare with my children. So I'm happy to be here with you, happy to share this time. And it's ironic because this week's episode is all about what happens when everything goes quiet and we enter into the bedroom. Yes, you heard it straight from me. We are talking about sex today. Yes, we are. And the funny thing is, I was thinking and reflecting on what I wanted to talk about. There's something I really wanted to speak about personally. And then for some reason, I don't know what it was, that I just got this thought that, I think it's time. We've been talking about doing this for a long time, and I think it's time. So let's just do it. Let's talk about how anxiety impacts our sex life or our intimacy. You don't even have to be engaging in intercourse to enjoy this podcast episode. We're talking about all things intimacy and arousal and sexual expression, even if it's, by yourself and you don't have a partner, that's totally fine. We're talking about all things related to our sexual expression here today. Now, please do know this will not be a talk that is focused on graphic information or personal stuff about me. Not at all. I'm really here to talk about the issues that can arise to do with mental illness and sex, the issues and struggles we may have. And then at the very end, my goal and hope is to give you some tools and tips and strategies that may or may not work for you, but they've worked for a lot of my clients. I will add here, just to sort of break the stigma right away, almost all of my clients at some point in therapy will address sex. They're usually really embarrassed. They're usually really ashamed. But then once we get talking about it and I share with them that this is normal therapy talk, this is normal for us to address the many ways in that anxiety can impact our life. And yeah, sex is one of them. Intimacy is one of them. Our relationships is one of them. The truth is, almost all the time, we want to get better because of our relationships. We want rich relationships. We want deep, meaningful relationships. And often, if you have an intimate partner, that involves, not always, but it often does involve some kind of sexual expression, right? And if it doesn't for you, that's totally okay as well, right? Like there's no judgment here. We're really just wanting to troubleshoot some of the common issues I see in my office, right? And hear about in my office. And so let's just go there. And it's going to be hard. And it might be uncomfortable because, like I said, every client who brings this topic into me, into session, says it's really uncomfortable. But I hope that I can provide some safety for you around this topic and maybe dispel some myths that you might have around intimacy, intercourse, sexual interaction, all the things, right? Because we don't talk about it enough. I wish someone had sat me down and told me all the things I now know about sex. I've done a lot of research on sex. I've done a lot of training on sex. And to be honest with you, if I wasn't an OCD therapist, an anxiety therapist, an eating disorder specialist, I'd probably want to specialize in, sex and therapy around sex. I love it. I think it's so interesting. And I just would love to really dive deep. Maybe that's something I'll do one day. I'd love to dive deep into understanding couples work in that sexual intimacy area. Anyway, let's first, before we get into all that, let's talk about the I Did a Hard Thing segment. Okay, so today we have a Instagram follower. Her name is Sarah, and she said the hard thing she did today was that she talked more in therapy. And I know that's a really simple, short one, but let's just give a massive shout out to Sarah, because here is where the growth happens. When you get the courage to say, hey, I need to talk to somebody about A, B, and C, or X, Y, and Z. Or in this case that we're doing today, SEX. That's amazing work, Sarah. I think that even I have to check in with myself when I go to therapy and say, is there anything I am not bringing up? I'll tell you a little story. I have a client. I adore this client. And at the beginning of every session, given the nature of this client and the personality of this client, instead of starting the session by going, how are you? What's going on? We say, it's sort of in joke now, we say, I walk in and I say, hey, what would you not like to talk about today? And then we giggle. And then we talk about it, because often the thing you don't want to talk about is the thing you probably should be talking about. The same goes with your partner. The same goes with your kids. Same goes with your parents. We've got to have those hard conversations, and we've got to be honest, and we've got to be transparent and kind as we do so. And so, as soon as I read that, I was like, oh yeah, that's going to be the hard thing of the week, because it's awesome. Okay, so awesome. All right, let's do it. Okay, so first of all, let's just do a little bit of basic psychoeducation. Okay, now it is going to be the case that when you have anxiety, it often will find a way to show up in all of the areas of life. Now, that is not because there is something wrong with you. That is not because you're a weak human being or there's something that you need to be concerned about. It's that is the nature of your brain, right? If you have a relationship where you try to push fear away, it tends to show up in more areas of your life. And the more you push it away, the more it shows up. This is a common belief and understanding we have in psychology, or a fact, that the more you push a thought away, the more it comes. It's called thought suppression. And what do we say about thought suppression? It never works. If you could see me, you would see me shaking my head back and forth. It never, shake my head, works. It does not work. Okay? And that's going to be the core takeaway of today, which is the more you try and get fear to go away, the more it will show up in the bedroom while you're having intimacy, intercourse, sexual expression with yourself, your partner, whoever it is, right? Now, as we move into this podcast, I want to be really sensitive to the many ways we can express sexuality. And so I'm going to be using her and him, but I want to make sure this podcast is very respectful to the many ways that we can express our sexual orientation, our sexual preference, our sexual identity. Okay, so let's just, we always want to show up and include everybody in the conversation. Okay, all right, good. Now, the thing to know here is there are different ways in which anxiety can show up depending on the specific struggle you're having. So I've got a couple of notes here because I didn't want to miss the main points. So the first one is, let's take a look at social anxiety. Social anxiety, for those who have social anxiety, that their anxiety may show up in the bedroom, and I'm going to use the word bedroom as a broad way of saying during sex. If you don't have sex in the bedroom and you have it in the kitchen, that's fine. Just, put the word kitchen in, or laundry, or wherever it is. Social anxiety will often show up in the bedroom in the form of the fear of being judged or ridiculed or embarrassed by the partner. And that's true for social anxiety, and it just happens to show up, as we said before, in the bedroom too, right? Now with social anxiety, often people will, and this will be true for all of the things I'm talking about, but I'm just going to go through what's coming up on the top of my head. For social anxiety, people often will avoid any kind of intimacy in fear of being judged. And a big thing that I speak with clients about is the avoidance of intimacy, of sexual expression in fear of being judged or in the fear of having to tolerate anxiety. And so they may avoid it. And if this is you, number one, my heart goes out to you because I get that. But it's also really important for us to acknowledge the problem. So I'm not here to shame you. I'm not here to make you feel like you're doing something wrong or you're to blame. It's just me saying this is how it presents often, right? And the other way is that when you do engage in some kind of intimacy sexually, you might then ruminate for a long period of time on what they thought. Was it good? Was it bad? Did they judge you? Did they not? What do they think about you? What do they think about your abilities? And it just goes on and on and on, right? And so that's often with social anxiety. Now, a thing to remember here is a lot of people with social anxiety require medication or some kind of substance, alcohol, drugs, whatever it may be, to take the edge off. And that too is a problem. Now, it may not be that you're abusing drugs and alcohol. That's fine. I'm not here again to make a judgment or to say that that is wrong. But it's important that we understand that if you're using drugs and alcohol to mask anxiety, anxiety will often find a way to take over, right? And you'll feel a sense of loss of control and a loss of empowerment because of that, right? It feeds the anxiety when we introduce a vice or a mask, right? Or a self-medication, right? Now, what is very closely linked to social anxiety is something called performance anxiety. Now, this is a highly microscopic attention to your performance. Now, the clients I've seen who've had performance anxiety spend a lot of time trying to muster up this Olympic performance, this Olympic level performance, this choreographed performance, this very high pressure performance when it comes to sexual intercourse or affection or intimacy. And what happens with that is often, and this is true again for all of the disorders and things I'm going to be speaking about, what often happens here is a massive lack or loss of arousal, right? If you're focused on trying to stop a thought or perform at this high high level, this unrealistic level, you will find that you might struggle to have an erection. You might struggle to orgasm. You might struggle to enjoy it, right? And you probably may find that you're distracted. The problem with this is when you put so much pressure on yourself, you end up becoming so focused on the performance that you forget to actually engage in the moment and in the present, which ends up reducing your performance, right? And then we get stuck in a cycle, right? Now, another thing to remember here is each one of these points, I could easily spend a whole podcast on each one, right? Easily. But I really just want to give you some food for thought, and I want to address as many issues as I can. And like I said, at the end, I'm going to give you some tools. Okay, so then we move on to OCD, and this is a huge one. A lot of my clients with OCD really struggle in the area of intimacy in the bedroom, often because the content of their obsessions is sexuality or sex related, right? And so for any of you who are struggling with sexual orientation obsessions, pedophilia obsessions, we could keep going on in terms of, many of the different ways that sex can interfere with the topic ultimately. It can interfere in terms of us having intrusive thoughts. What ends up happening here is we do these common 4 compulsions to avoid or reduce that anxiety that is related. So we might check internally, am I aroused? Am I not? What does that mean? What could it mean? What should it mean? Well, review. And we do this internal check, right? The second, same as social anxiety, which is avoidance, right? The third would be reassurance seeking. This is a huge one when it comes to sex, is often people are doing these internal checks, checking to see how they feel or whether they're having sexual thoughts or not, or whether they're aroused or not, and using that as reassurance that their fear is or is not true, right? The last one is mental rumination. So really simple. I've kind of reviewed it already, which is just the mental, Olympics that you do in your brain, this mental hula hooping on trying to solve what the thought means or trying to block the thoughts. Now, again, I have had so many clients with OCD report that they're spending the entire time they're having intercourse trying to stop having thoughts, right? And their partner might often ask them, like, is everything okay? What's going on? And they're panicking inside because they're so focused on trying to control thoughts, feelings, sensations, and urges, right? If that's you, you're not alone. I know it feels like you're alone, but please just take some reassurance from me that this is a very common topic that I speak with clients about and that they speak with me about, right? Such an important conversation to have with your therapist if you are in therapy, because there's no shame in talking about it. And if you're with a skilled clinician, they'll know how to help you. They'll have the safety and the knowledge and the education to help, right? Okay, next one, panic disorder. Okay. Sometimes we can have massive panic attacks during intimacy, or there is research to show that some people, not all people, I think we're sort of raised to believe, or culture has taught us to believe, that during and after an orgasm is like this most relaxing, joyful time where you should feel super connected to your partner. There is a ton of research to show, particularly for people who have anxiety, that those moments during and after orgasm are actually highly triggering and activating for someone with anxiety. To be really a vulnerable moment, where a very fragile moment, because you've kind of let go physically and mentally. And that can be really scary for people who have anxiety. And some people experience panic around this, right? Again, if this is you, you're not alone. There's tools for all of this stuff. So if this is scaring you, or, you're feeling like, oh gosh, this is stuff I didn't even know to worry about, please know that the tools are much the same for all of these things, right? Now, closely related to panic disorder is the massive, massive impact that trauma has on our sexual intimacy, right? Now, I am not a trauma therapist. I consider myself trauma informed, but I would never say that I am a skilled trauma specialist. But what do we know based on the research is, yes, trauma does tend to show up in sexual interactions, particularly if you have trauma related to sexual abuse or assault or witnessing such things. This is very, very common and something we must honor and be gentle and careful around, right? Again, with trauma, very high levels of, substance use when it comes to the ability, managing, and often substance use in order to be able to achieve sexual intimacy with people, to take the edge off, right? Now, there's, again, no shame here. We do the best we can. We're all just here on earth trying to connect and feel loved and to love each other. And in order to do that, sometimes, we move back into behaviors that can sometimes get us into trouble. It's okay. We're all in this together, right? And again, sometimes it ebbs and flows. Some people can have periods of time where this doesn't bother them, and then other periods, for unknown reasons, it really does bother them. So that's really important to just take note of. Okay. Another way that it can show up, as struggles can show up around intimacy, is in the area of body dysmorphic disorder and eating disorders. And I've clumped these in together, not that they really need to go together, but mostly surrounding the incredible amount of pressure we feel from society to be this perfect body when it comes to sex. Right? I remember reading teen magazines that were influencing the way I thought my body needed to look and the way I thought I needed to act when it came to sexual expression. No one was talking about body respect and body positivity and body neutrality back then. And even now, a lot of my teen clients share the same fears, which is, the fear that a guy may or may not want them to look a certain way and act a certain way and be into certain things and not into other things, right? And a huge piece of this is around our body and the way that we expect our bodies to perform and ultimately be displayed, right? Now, in addition to that, with eating disorders, we also have to look at, often there is some struggle for arousal based on low body weight, malnourishment, lack of energy because of lack of, intake of food. There are many, many extensions to how these disorders can impact our sex life. Right? And each and every one, if you're in therapy or you're in the early stages of recovery of these disorders or not in recovery, is we have to honor each and every one of these and make sure in treatment that we really do a thorough assessment to make sure we're not missing any of these core medical issues that could be impacting our sex life, right? Absolutely. Again, addiction is another one. Addiction, substance abuse and addiction can have effects on us medically and can sometimes cause us to not be able to perform sexually, right? And so if that's the case, please, again, go speak to your doctor, speak to a clinician, a trained clinician who respects you and provides you with a degree of safety to speak about these vulnerable topics, right? Now, another reason that people struggle in the bedroom around mental illness is the common known side effect of some medications, which is they can reduce people's arousal or ability to orgasm. Not all. Everybody is different, and I do not want anyone to take this and think that that means I'm saying every medication, because the truth is every person is different. I can have one client try one medication and have a really difficult time with arousal, and then I can have another client, of the same, gender and size, try exactly the same medication at the same level and have no problem at all, right? So it's really important, again, that we don't discriminate with, this idea that medication all causes sexual side effects, that they don't. But if that is the case, it's something to speak with your doctor about, right? These are all issues we can tweak and resolve over time and with care and with attention, right? Now, 2 side notes here, and I would call these secondary impacts. Number 1 is if you have anxiety and you're managing your anxiety, or you're not, the chances are that you're going to be pretty exhausted. It is exhausting to manage anxiety. And you've spent the whole day tensing up and trying to manage it and, figure out what to do with it and how to act and how to experience them and what to do with them. By the end of the day, or even by the beginning of the day, it's highly likely that you have lost interest purely because of exhaustion. And that's it. That might be as simple as it has to be and as complex as it has to be. It is very common for people who have a just general experience of anxiety to be exhausted and just tapped out, and they're, it's the last thing they think about because simply anxiety takes over, right? And then the second one is depression, just this general experience of depression. One of the common symptoms of depression is loss of pleasure, loss of interest in pleasure. And that involves sex, intimacy, connection. It's the truth. And that's not because you're weak, and it's not because there's something wrong with you, and it's not because you're a prude or any of those other hurtful words that people have used. It might just be that the nature of depression, the chemical component of depression, has taken away your interest for things that are pleasurable, right? So there is a brief list of the many ways that anxiety and sex can not really mesh together so well, right? Or they can kind of fight with each other, right? And so I'm sure there are many, many more, and I could, like I said, spend hours talking about each and every one. But what I really want to do is bring us now to, first, a place of safety, and then second, some tools. So let's go through some of these tools. Okay. So we know that when it comes to sex, if we are focusing on either getting rid of anxiety or focusing on the thing that you are anxious about, we know that you're probably not focusing on the actual intimacy, right? By no fault of yours. And the thing about intimacy is it kind of often will require a pretty big, complete body experience for it to be really tender and wonderful, right? Now, not to say that you have to be all in, because it's sometimes impossible. But what I would encourage you to do is, when you are engaging in intimacy in whatever form feels right to you, the major thing I want you to do first is to drop all expectations. Drop the expectation that it has to be good. Drop the expectation that you have to look good, that you have to have good thoughts, that you have to perform like an Olympic athlete. Drop the expectation that you have to please the person. Take away all of those expectations and try as best as you can to just focus on being with that person, or if it's just with yourself. Just being. And then if you can add to the being curious. Be curious about what may or may not be happening, right? Instead of telling yourself the way it should and shouldn't be curious. Because when we put on our curiosity hat, our metaphorical hat, we become open and creative and expressive. And ultimately, curious is the word, is curious about what might be that we didn't yet know, right? We take away the negative, like I said, this heavy-laced narrative of who society telling you to be or wants you to be. And you just spend time connecting with whoever it is that you're with, right? Now, the second piece here is, when it comes to intimacy, one of the most valuable tools is to tap into your senses. It's a highly sensory experience and activity. Take notice of these 5 senses. What do you see? What do you smell? What do you taste? What do you feel? Right? And again, become curious and put your attention to that. And as you're doing this, you're probably going to be bombarded by some thoughts, because that's what anxiety's doing. Its job is to say, wait, there may be danger. That's what anxiety does. Its job is to remind you of the possible danger. And your job is to see it, take note, but don't write an essay. Just take note of it and then come on back. And you may have to do that the entire time. You may have to do it for a part of the time. It doesn't matter. Again, take away the expectations that this has to be good and amazing and mind-blowing and any of those words, right? Take away the expectation of that and just be. And then if you can, be curious. And then if you can, tap into your senses, right? The truth is that there is a very common sexual psychology concept called sensate focus. You can Google it if you like. But it's ultimately for people who are struggling with arousal and intimacy and expectations and anxiety and all of these things. And it puts the focus on not reaching some kind of outcome, climax, orgasm, result. They actually take the focus entirely away from that. In many cases, if you're in sex therapy, they may say you're not allowed to climax or, orgasm, or however you want to word that. And your job is just to engage in small bouts of petting, just for the sake of being curious and enjoying each other, yourself, whatever it may be, right? And through that, often people can regain their relationship with arousal, intimacy, sexual expression, just because they took that expectation away, that outcome away, and it became about just being with each other, I always think about it's like food. If you go to this good restaurant and you're like, oh my gosh, it better be so good. This is going to be so good. I can't wait. It's just going to be the best thing ever. I don't know. That expectation, that pressure gets in the way, right? But if you go and you just go to, a friend's house or, a small restaurant, and you just take delight in the fact that you're not having to cook and you get to enjoy and sit back and just be, right? It tends to be wonderful and joyful, and we can celebrate around that. And the same happens for sex, right? The same happens for sex. And we've got to take those expectations out of it and give ourselves a ton of self-compassion for the fact that anxiety is showing up in the room, right? A whole nother experience is showing up in the room. It's just not you and your partner, or, it's not just you. There's a whole nother voice coming in, and we have to make space for that. Bring it on in, invite it in. All right. If you've got OCD, you've heard me say this before, come on in. Let's do this together, right? Don't close the door on it. It's going to find a way to come in. Let it in. And for many who are struggling medically with arousal is, again, speak with your doctor. But still, I have heard many stories and treated a lot of clients who have struggled for medical reasons and were unable to reach an orgasm, to meet this expectation. But they learned through connection and being really mindful that they don't even have to reach any kind of outcome to have fun and connect and feel fulfilled in their sex life, right? There are many definitions of what is called a healthy sex life. It does not have to be this black and white story that you saw in a movie somewhere or in pornography, right? That's one thing I really should mention is, given now that pornography is so readily available, we have research to show that it is tainting the perception and the expectations of our youth in what they are expected to perform, how they're expected to perform, I should say. And so, okay, we're being given this input from pornography or, again, society on how we're supposed to perform. Well, that's not realistic. And again, this is where I would encourage you and urge you to speak with a clinician or a trusted person. Maybe it's a religious leader, or whoever you feel comfortable with, to talk about what's realistic and what can be realistically expected of you, right? Because we can't really expect you to do some kind of acrobatics and put on a whole show. That's unrealistic and unfair. And, unless you're really into that, which of course it's kudos to you, but unless you're into that, I don't want you to, again, feel like you're not sizing up because you're not able to perform at that level, right? So, again, it's mostly mindfulness and it's mostly realistic expectations, and it's giving yourself a ton of slack. It's okay. Have your partner, talk to them, let them know what you're going through, let them know what your hopes and dreams are. And somehow together, if you can, walk towards each other, taking away and stripping down these expectations. The truth is, you can probably bet that your partner is struggling in some way with this too. Because I think everyone walks into the bedroom, not everyone, but many of us walk into the bedroom with some insecurities and some, anxiety and some stuff. We know we come with our own stuff, and that's okay, right? So sometimes it's just having a conversation, and you might find that your partner's like, no way, me too, I totally get you, right? So that's it. There is some great resources. I will link to them in the show notes about how to get more specific therapy in relation to sex therapy. To be honest, if you want, there are actually specialized sex therapists. That's what they do. And so you can go on to the links. I'll add them in the show notes. There are specialists who are linked, who have got license and training and certifications in these areas who can help you if you're really finding that you need more than just these tools that I'm giving you today, right? You know, you got to bring your anxiety in the room with you. Let it be there, but then give your attention to what's going on, right? So that's it. Go gentle, guys. Give yourself some slack. Go slow. Take your time, right? Don't rush it. Take away those unrealistic expectations. And this is where I would say, just enjoy the small stuff, right? Enjoy the teeny tiny moment, right? A therapist recently said to me, and it kind of blew me away. They said, you would never expect the movie to have every single scene be awesome. Even your favorite movie has some scenes you didn't love. So why would you expect anything different from yourself, right? You're allowed to have scenes that you don't really love. It doesn't make you bad, right? Okay? All right, my friends. Tough subject. Thank you for sticking with it. Sometimes it's hard to hear this stuff, and I hope that I have provided you a safe, respectful place to start to think about this stuff. And we'll continue the conversation. You know, I've got a few exciting things in the works regarding the whole subject of sex. So stay tuned and we'll get there. Have a wonderful day. Thank you all so much for supporting me. Please do leave a review. I would love to see a handful of reviews come in every week. Please do. If you're finding the podcast helpful in any way, the one thing I would really appreciate is a review, an honest review, because honest reviews, even if you've got questions and concerns, please do continue to leave reviews, because it helps me be better, and it helps us get people, and it helps us reach people. It helps people to feel trust within the brand of CBT School. So that is so helpful to me. Okay. It's getting late here, guys. So I'm going to sign off and have a wonderful day. It is a beautiful day to do hard things. And so I'll see you soon. Please note that this podcast or any other resources from cbtschool.com should not replace professional mental health care. If you feel you would benefit, please reach out to a provider in your area. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for supporting cbtschool.com.